Hi, everybody. We are, whoops, wrong screen popped up. We are live on Facebook. This is John with Murder by the Book, and I'm super excited tonight to be joined by Brian Freeman and Joshua Hood. Joshua Hood actually got to visit us in the before times, before everything closed down. So we were excited to actually be able to host him at the store this year. Brian Freeman is going to be talking about The Bourne Evolution, his newest in the Bourne series. And we have Joshua Hood with him. Joshua Hood released Robert Ludlum's The Treadstone Resurrection earlier this year. Brian Freeman is the best-selling author of more than 20 novels, including the Jonathan Stride and Frost Easton series. His Audible original, The Deep, Deep Snow, was number 12 on the New York Times bestseller audio bestseller list. His novel Spilled Blood won the best hardcover novel in the International Thriller Writers Awards, and his novel The Burying Place was a finalist for the same award. His debut, Immoral, won the Macavity Award and was a finalist for the Gold Dagger, Edgar, Anthony, and Barry Awards for Best First Novel. Brian lives in Minnesota with his wife, and Joshua Hood is the author of Warning, Order, and Clear by Fire. He graduated from the University of Memphis before joining the military and spending 5 years in the 82nd Airborne Division. He was a team leader in the 3-504 Parachute Infantry Regiment in Iraq from 2005 to 2006, conducting combat operations in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. From 2007 to 2008, he served as a squad leader in the 1508 Parachute Infantry Regiment in Afghanistan, for which he was decorated for valor in Operation Furious Pursuit. On his return to civilian life, he became a sniper team leader on a full-time SWAT team in Memphis, where he was awarded the Life-Saving Medal. Currently, he works as the Director of Veteran Outreach for the American Warrior Initiative. How are you guys doing tonight?
We are doing great.
Thanks so much for joining us. So if you guys are watching on Facebook, you can leave comments for either author in the comments. I am going to pop away and let them chat, and I will be back in just a little bit to relay those questions. So you guys have fun, and I will see you in a few minutes.
There we go. It's the Bourne Boys.
I know. Thank you very much for allowing me to do this, Brian. Like I said and was talking a little bit before, this is a phenomenal book. And I had so many things that I wanted to ask you just from reading it and from what I've heard that I had to write them down. So if you see me glancing away, that's what I'm doing. Obviously, let's start off with, I'm sure you've already been asked a million times, how did this happen? Obviously, from my experience, being kind of allowed into the front door of the Ludlum, greatness was a huge humbling experience. But you actually took over Bourne. You took over who I consider, America's James Bond. What was that like?
Yeah, I can remember reading The Bourne Identity for the first time all the way back in 1980. I was 17 years old. And, if you had told me back then that 40 years later, a book would be coming out that had Robert Ludlum's and my name on the cover at the same time, I would have said, you're just crazy. So yeah, this has been just such an honor. It is, Ludlum has been one of my heroes, as a reader and as a writer. And so this was just an amazing opportunity. I don't know if you got a chance at all to look inside the black box of how they did this. But for me, about probably 18 months ago or so, I got a call from my agent, and she let me know that Putnam was looking for a writer to kind of take over the reboot of the Jason Bourne series. And was I interested in having my hat tossed into the ring? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Here you're talking about, the primo thriller opportunity in the whole genre. And I said, yeah, let's go after it. And that's kind of when the black box took over. There was, I think, 3 or 4 months of just dead silence after that. And it went on long enough that I was thinking, well, I assume they've decided to go another way. I'm sure there were, all sorts of thriller writers that were looking for this opportunity. And then I guess it was February of last year, I got a call from my agent again. And she said 5 words that will linger in my memory for a long time. Putnam wants you for Bourne. And we were off to the races. I talked to Tom Colgan and kind of laid out what I thought we could do in terms of bringing Bourne back to life and into the modern era. And I wrote up a plot concept for him and some sample chapters, and he ran those by the estate, and they loved them, and we were off to the races. So it kind of felt like life coming full circle. I mean, from back in the days when I was a teenager reading Ludlum books, and suddenly, here we are in the Ludlum universe. It's just amazing.
Obviously, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with Bourne, but more so because you weren't just asked to take over. Hey, this book just happened, take over the next one. You were actually asked to reboot the entire, the library as it was. Take what had been written and bring it all into the now. And in a way, from my point of view, I wondered, were you given kind of creative control? Were you told hey, stay within these bounds? Like, how did you even begin to process all of that?
Yeah. And that's one of the questions I've gotten from a lot of readers is do they need to have read 14 Jason Bourne novels and seen all the Matt Damon movies to enjoy this book? And the fact is, the Bourne evolution basically functions as a standalone. I mean, I think most people are sort of aware of sort of who Jason Bourne is as a hero in terms of the man that's lost his memory and struggles with his identity and his lack of past. But this is an all new Jason Bourne, all new plot and character, so people can really dive right in without knowing anything about what's gone on with Bourne in the past. And I spent a lot of time thinking about, how we could approach that, because there have been so many iterations of Bourne over the years. I mean, you figure going back to 1980, Ludlum wrote 3 Jason Bourne novels. And then Eric von Lustbader wrote another 11 Bourne novels after Mr. Ludlum passed away. Then, of course, you've got all of the Matt Damon movies. And of course, I may be one of the few people who remember that in addition to the Matt Damon movies, Richard Chamberlain was originally Jason Bourne in an ABC miniseries in 1988. That's right. Yeah, with Jacqueline Smith as Marie St. Jacques. So you've got so many visions in people's head of who Jason Bourne is, and if I tried to sort of craft this melange to keep all these people happy and to sort of build off all the different things that have gone on with this character, I just didn't think it would work. And so I said to Tom, I think really the way to bring Bourne back is to really kind of go back to his roots and try to be true to the Ludlum character and really go back to who Bourne was in the Bourne identity, but take that character and then put him in a modern story in a modern era and essentially kind of start the whole series over.
And one of the things, just like you, I was a big fan of the Bourne books before I ever saw the movies.
Yeah.
And then, when I began to write Treadstone a little bit, I was like, well, most people are going to kind of see this world through the lens that we've seen on this silver screen with Damon.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's difficult enough on its own. But what I found, like, literally blew me away was when I picked up this book, I felt that if you'd ripped off this cover and put it in a library and someone picked it up, it felt like Ludlum wrote the book. I mean, the descriptions, the tone, the pacing, everything. And the entire time I was asking myself, I even asked Tom, our editor, like, how did he do that? How did he, it's easy to imitate, but you didn't imitate. You took what he did and then you created something new. And it was kind of like this, almost like this jazz fusion type thing that was
right.
Just, and that is one thing that has been at the top of my list since I read the book. Like, how did you do that?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, that's exactly what I was going for, and I love that jazz fusion idea, because honestly, that's kind of the approach that I took with this. I mean, Tom right from the get-go said, "Look, don't try to imitate Ludlum. It's never going to work." And I think that's true for a lot of reasons. I mean, the first thing is Ludlum's style was so distinctive and so true to him that I think if you try to imitate it, it winds up feeling like a caricature, and it doesn't feel authentic. And so as I was looking at it, I said, I want to write my own story and I want to write my own book. And yet I want to be able to approach the writing process through how I saw Ludlum writing his novels, and
Right.
there's such a raw, dramatic power to the way Ludlum writes. I mean, his descriptions, his verbs, his energy in what's going on in every scene. I mean, that really is what makes a Ludlum book a Ludlum book. And so I wasn't trying to capture the way he uses his words, but I wanted to sort of take that same approach to the writing and really feel the sort of in the moment drama the way he did in his books, and try to let that flow onto the page.
But also you really captured, like, I felt that he always used reading Ludlum, if I had to picture it, it was almost like a Hitchcock, dark theme, but it was always very centered in a place, centered in, how an outsider comes in. You're seeing this world, the scene through the view of an outsider, but almost hearing it as a tour guide, because he fits there. And that's one thing that struck me, especially in the opening scene, which I'm not going to give away, but immediately, just like Ludlum used to do, you're in that place, and right off the bat, there's that question that, that I felt like he always had, this question of what is going on. And then you began to weave this, this wonderful tapestry of a story. But was Canada and some of the other places you went to, why did you choose those particular places?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, sense of place is so important in the Ludlum books, and that's one thing I've always focused on in my books as well. And being a Minnesotan, the sense of place and the sense of weather and things like that is sort of a pretty important part of our day-to-day lives. And so I've gotten used over the years to really focusing on the sense of place in everything I write. I kind of call it the six senses of place. I want you to not only feel as if you've been dropped down in every scene and you can hear it and touch it and taste it and smell it all around you, but I also want to kind of evoke people's emotions and memories, and what does it feel like to be in a particular place? Because if you can do that, then I think people really, they not only understand what they're seeing, but what they're feeling in that location as well. And I think that's something that Ludlum was great at. Canada and Quebec City, I've been to Quebec City only once in my life. I was actually there for a crime fiction festival a few years ago, and I remember walking through the upper town and the lower town, and you've got these great old historical romantic buildings, and Chateau Frontenac up on the cliffside, and it's just got such romantic, dramatic power. I thought, God, we've got to use this, in a movie or a book, because there's just such great drama here. And so when I was thinking about Bourne, there were two things in my mind. One is I was looking all the way through the Bourne evolution in terms of what kinds of echoes I could bring in from the Bourne identity, from the original book. And for Bourne aficionados, you'll see a lot of big and little tributes to the Bourne identity throughout the novel. One of them being that Marie Saint-Jacques in the Bourne identity is a Canadian economist. Well, that was the reason why I made Abby Laurent a Canadian journalist. And if I went that far, I thought, well, let's go ahead and set the opening of the book in Abby's backyard there in Quebec City, because I just thought that would then be the perfect kind of way to bring in this dramatic locale.
Because I felt, what's this? Hold on one second, sorry. When I was writing it, I felt, when I was working on Treadstone, I felt, I cannot start in France. I cannot start in, Europe. I kind of need to stay a little bit away from DC. And so for me, it limited where you could kind of go with this book. And kind of like you, I threw a little bit of, little homages in there as much as I could, even, the main characters, but Canada was brilliant because, I used Venezuela because nobody was talking about it, but it was a place where I could, blow up a lot of people. No one would care.
And it was, you get a lot of it in the headlines in the last few months too. So, yeah. Yeah.
I just, but you have a mix of the new and the old world in Canada. And I think that kind of was the yin and the yang to this reboot of something old, yet something new.
And I was trying, and I think it's sort of a hallmark not only of the Ludlum books, but then of the movies too. And I always wanted to try to keep Matt Damon and the movies in my head. Not that I thought that the movies really reflected kind of Ludlum's books, but I also knew that so many people know Bourne through the movies that I had to at least kind of weave that sensation into the novels. And one of the things I think you find in the movies is such a great use of locales. So to have the book kind of globetrot around from Canada to Las Vegas to New York to the Bahamas and out to Scotland, it just felt very Bourne-like to kind of bring people back that way.
And my second question, and I don't know how many people know this, writing one book is hard enough, especially if it's a Ludlum book. But you were writing 2 books at one time. Yeah. You were writing, and let me make sure I got this right, because when I first heard it, I was like, there's no way. You were writing your own, which is Thief River Falls, and then you were writing Bourne. And I read an article, and I think you said you would write one for a month or a week and then set it aside and then go back to the other one. And all this is while you're having a deadline, while you're writing, 2 separate genres.
Right. Yeah, the 2 books were due within 2 weeks of each other. One was due October 31st, one was due November 15th. It was insane. It was absolutely insane. But and I would do a week on one and then a week on the other. And I was trading off back and forth. It is, I'd never tried anything like that before. That was the first time I'd faced that, but that was the first time I had deadlines so close together like that. And I was really scared of it. I didn't know whether it was going to work or not. But honestly, it turned out to be surprisingly energizing because of the fact that the stories were so different. I think if I was writing 2 pretty similar books at the same time, it would have been much harder. Because I would have never felt like I had a break. Whereas in doing it this way, working on Bourne was so different from working on my other book that putting down one and taking up the other was sort of like immersing myself in a completely different world. And so that actually ended up kind of being an inspirational, energizing part of the process. But it was still hell. I mean, yeah, it was 6 or 7 months of just sheer craziness. And of course, I'm doing it again this year. I'm doing the exact same thing right now. I'm writing the second Bourne novel, and I'm writing my next Audible original simultaneously. I've switched it around a little bit this year. I'm actually focusing, instead of on time, last year it was a week on one, a week on the other. I'm advancing it by word count. So I'm trying to get to a certain word count in each book before I trade off. So we'll see how that works.
Do you feel any pressure? Like, I'm not a very good deadline writer, and I put pressure on myself with, hey, there's a deadline looming, but then when you throw in, hey, this is a Bourne book, it added some things. Did you feel pressure then when you started it, and now knowing what you kind of went through, it's kind of like having a woman having a baby. You're like, oh, I don't want to go through that again. And you're like, you kind of forget all the hard stuff, and you're like, yeah, this will be fine. Yeah.
No, that's dead right. I mean, pressure, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure you felt that way. I mean, going into Ludlum's universe and I mean, just knowing you're going to have your name on the cover with Robert Ludlum. I mean, those are big shoes to fill, and that's just plain an intimidating prospect. And after the initial excitement of it wore off, I was kind of like, oh my God, what the hell have I gotten myself into? I mean, this is. But the first thing I did was on my whiteboard as I started thinking about the plot. I literally wrote "Have fun" at the top of the whiteboard, and I left it there through the whole process because I wanted to remind myself every day that this was an incredible opportunity, something that is just a capstone of my whole professional life. And you know what? Stop and enjoy it. Remember every day what a really, really cool thing this is. And honestly, that helped me get through the pressure and kind of keep focused on the fact that, I'm telling a story here. I've told a lot of stories, and ultimately that's what this is all about.
Well, kind of following along that lines, myself, I love to, and I know a lot of authors love to talk shop, craft, but I've learned that aspiring authors and people who would typically attend an event like this, if we were allowed to do so, they love hearing about not only the creative process, but tricks or, anything that they enjoy hearing, like, oh, I write with a pencil, like, little things like that. So
Yeah.
I always thought, like, what would a day in the life of Brian Freeman be as you're working on not just Born, but any project? You talked about your whiteboard, and where did that original, idea come from? How do you begin to take that and end up with something, like this?
Yeah. It. I wish there were any kind of good answer for that, because it happens so differently on every book. I keep a file of ideas, of not book ideas per se, but just themes that sound interesting, characters that I'd like to explore, things I see in the newspaper that look like interesting issues that I might want to bring up sometime. And when I get around to thinking about a new book, I feel like I sort of dump all those things off the computer, like I'd take a nightstand drawer and dump it onto my bed, and start looking for connections and how things fit together. So as I was thinking about Born, I just started. I knew the character. I knew what I wanted to do with the character, and I started then kind of looking at, if you lift Bourne up out of the 1970s and the Vietnam and Watergate era and all the conspiracy theories that went through that time, and drop him down in 2020, like, well, look, there are actually a lot of parallels between where we are in society now and where we were then. There's a lot of divisiveness and a lot of people not trusting each other, all of which kind of feels very Ludlum-esque. So I started looking at what's going on in the world. What are the things that are causing stress and tension and fear for people? And of course, this was long before we got to all the things in 2020. But so I started looking at big tech and data privacy issues and data hacks and the way social media is sort of infiltrating everybody's lives. And I started kind of thinking, well, what if Jason Bourne got caught up in the middle of those things? And literally I just use, I fill up notepads with ideas, and I fill up the whiteboard with ideas. As you go through my notepads, you'll see 3 letters over and over again: PTO. And that means play this out. And what I do is I come up with an idea, think, okay, well, what if I went this way? And I will literally kind of map out and play out, what would this do to the story? What would this do to the characters if I took it in this direction? And sometimes it works, and sometimes it goes, nope, that's not going to do it. And I move on to the next page. I wipe off the whiteboard and I try again. So I kind of start moving down different threads to see, all right, if I went this way, what have I broken in the other things that I'm looking at, and what problems does this solve? So you get a lot of kind of threads out there, and you reach a point where finally you suddenly start seeing all the threads come together, and that's when the plot really starts to take shape.
What's kind of crazy is, sometimes, like, it feels like you're reading the tea leaves. You're like, this book's not going to come out for another year.
Yeah.
So what is an emerging threat? And like with Venezuela, it was kind of like, maybe this will be a big deal, maybe it won't, but I'm tired of writing books in the Middle East. But in like the ultimate, life imitating art, like today, they had the heads of all the big tech.
It was very nice of them to arrange that from a marketing standpoint. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was sitting there, like, listening to this, and I was like, can you, come up with a better week to have your book out?
I know, it's funny how sometimes things really work out. My last Jonathan Stride novel was a book called Alter Ego. And it was all about this actor who was playing Jonathan Stride in a movie version of one of Stride's cases. And this actor turns out to have all sorts of very filthy and dark secrets. Well, I turned in the book like 2 weeks before the whole Harvey Weinstein thing broke open. And my editor's on the phone calling me and saying, well, did you know something? So you just never know. Sometimes it works out and everything works beautifully, but and then you look at everything going on in 2020, and oh my God, who could have predicted the kind of craziness that we're going through this year? But somebody probably did. There's a book out there that did it. So yeah, I think you just kind of you take your best shot and you look at where things are going in the world, and recognize that ultimately, it's still about telling a great story, and people are pretty forgiving if the world went in a different way than you thought, but you're still telling a great story. That's okay.
We'll talk about, you were talking earlier about the reboot, and it's like,
Yeah.
bring this into the modern era. And literally, you're reading the book and you're looking up on CNN or whatever, and like what you're, reading about, they're actually talking about. And of all the ways you could have gone, the big tech, utilizing it the way you did and bringing, I felt like there was a new freshness to Treadstone and the way you portrayed that. And, that was one of the things I was concerned about, because my book came out before yours, and
Sure.
I was like, oh, well, I tried to go into some detail, but at the same time, I was like, well, he's got to use Treadstone too. And so, the entire kind of balancing those two worlds while creating this new world, just well done. I just cannot say enough. And, they're not paying me to say this. It's one of those things that such a daunting task, writing 2 books at once, and you still pull it off far, just beyond anything else. And it's just amazing.
Well, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. I had somebody on Twitter yesterday who tweeted out, that he thought that Mr. Ludlum would be proud, and I thought, that's the highest praise I can think of. If readers feel like Ludlum would look at what we're doing to honor his legacy, that's great. One of the only things I'm really sad about in this whole process is that I never got a chance to meet Ludlum. I mean, I would have loved that opportunity, and so I see pictures of him that come up on my computer, and I knew that face so well all the years that I was reading his books, and I was like, damn, life sucks sometimes that he was taken away, and never did have a chance to meet him. So
there was I don't know how I came across it, but I was actually, I don't know what I was looking for online, but the way things work, this feed popped up where it had these interviews that someone has remastered and put up on YouTube of Ludlum. And so, sitting there listening to him talk, he's like, well, he's got a cigarette, and
yeah.
And now I was like, why is he always wearing 2 watches?
And you talked about using a pencil. He actually wrote all of his books in pencil in longhand. Like, oh my God. I was actually down in back in the mid 90s. I was working at a college, and I was in their alumni program, and I had to visit some college alumni down in Naples, Florida. And this woman lived in a condo, and I don't know how it came up, but she mentioned that she lived in a condo opposite from where Ludlum lived. And she said she would get up at 4 a.m. to get a drink of water, and she'd look across the way, and the floor where Ludlum lived was all completely lit up. The rest of the building was all dark. Ludlum's floor all lit up, because that was when he did his writing, was in the middle of the night.
Just hearing his process, and how he would take an idea, and he would, according to the interview, he said, well, I would write 100-page outline of it, and then I would let the character take me where it wanted to. Did you feel that when you were writing Born, he was taking you somewhere? Or I kind of felt, I wasn't writing Born, but in Treadstone, people asked me, and I said, well, I feel like I'm borrowing Mr. Ludlum's Bentley, and I don't want to be the guy that dents it up, and so I'm going to take great care of it. But you're kind of like, taking his namesake out for dinner or whatever. What was that like? And did you feel personally, as an author, someone who is a natural creative, that hampered your creative ability to take, because now you got to do all this again, right? You're working on the second book now.
Right. Exactly. Initially I was a little concerned about that, but I will say, Tom and the estate were both really supportive and not trying to tie my hands about what to do, which was terrific. I mean, that was my principal, fear in the beginning was, well, how much creative control are they going to really want over the story I tell? And they managed the whole process with a pretty light touch, which was really good. So yeah, I was concerned about it, thinking, well, I know my own characters inside and out. I've been writing them for 15 years, and now suddenly I've got to get inside the head of someone else's character. But as I started getting into it, I realized that, honestly, I've spent more time with Jason Bourne in my life than I have with my own characters. I mean, it goes back literally to when I was 17 years old. So I've grown up with Jason Bourne. So when I started actually kind of getting the words on the page, it felt surprisingly natural, like Jason Bourne had just been kind of waiting for me to come along and pick him up and bring him into this environment. So yeah, it was a strange sort of synergy that I felt with him as a character.
Because I always wondered if anybody would be able to do it, to be able to write this if they hadn't been a fan first, which luckily I was, and it sounds like, you were. And as I went back when I first started to write again, the first thing I did was go back and read all the books again.
Yep, exactly.
But this time I'm looking, I'm not reading for pleasure. I'm kind of looking for things. And, I was thinking there are a lot of parallels between, like you said, what was happening back then and what's happening now.
Yep.
But do you feel that you have the creativity, because this is your Bourne?
Sure.
I mean, it's under the Ludlum name, but it's got a different feel. He's a different person. This is your Bourne. Do you feel that you could take his arc the way you would like to go without, it'd be like they put out the new Star Wars and people, with Jar Jar Binks, whatever, and they're like, well, and the first one with Luke and Leia, this didn't happen. And I felt that there was kind of almost this miniature disaster trying to tie these later things into the original. Do you feel that, free of what had been written in the past, since basically, not obviously Mr. Ludlum's original, but there's a lot of books that came between the
Yeah, I do feel free of that. It's not, they're not great books. It's just that I think the practical reality of rebooting Jason Bourne is that you can't really go back to a decade's worth of history and expect that to really work for the readers and for a new story. I mean, I think you have to kind of go back to Bourne's origin and start reinventing things. And so it's a balancing act. It's a delicate balancing act. I'm trying to be extremely true to the character and who Jason Bourne is and what has made him such an enduring, iconic figure in the thriller world, literally for 4 decades. And yet I feel pretty free to be able to sort of now mold that future in my own way, because I'm trying to keep the character authentic, but now kind of put him into a whole new frame of storytelling.
And this was something that I was asked a lot, and I gave my opinion, but I wasn't walking in his shoes. What is it that makes Jason Bourne so enduring, makes him, I mean, there's list after list of, protagonists in this genre.
Yeah.
But, you, in my opinion, you kind of have, James Bond and Jason Bourne. Those are kind of the top tier.
Yeah, you really do. You really do. I think ironically, one of the things that makes Bourne so appealing as a hero is that he's kind of a broken hero. I think that if he were more of a superhero, it would be easy to just see him as one in the pack. But the fact is that he's got this basic human struggle. I mean, because of the memory loss, because of his loss of identity, he's constantly struggling, not only with what his past was, but with really who he is as a person. I mean, am I a moral man? Am I a killer? What am I as a human being? And I think that people can really relate to the intensity of that struggle. I mean, it's taking something that we all face as human beings and putting it in sort of a dramatic thriller context. And as a result, I just think people feel a kinship with Bourne, and I think that's why, you know, all these iterations, it speaks to something universal in people that trying to understand kind of who they are.
And, you know, sometimes when I try to think up new plots or new characters, you know, you take something that's, you know, germane to what you do, and then something that's the opposite. And a lot of times, you know, I'll sit there and think like, man, why didn't I, you know, come up with that? Like, you know, it's like the guy who invented the pet rock. You're like,
Yeah.
why did I not think of that? And the idea that's always stuck with me was like the simplicity of the genius of an assassin who was good at what he did. He wanted to do that, but now he can't remember
Right.
you know, anything about it. And it's a tragic thing, but the unraveling, you know, of Bourne in every one of these books is just so fascinating, because I believe we can all see, you know, a part of ourselves in there.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, that's what's going to be the interesting thing, I think, for me going forward. I mean, because we've taken Bourne and, you know, moved him into the modern era, I feel like at some point, it's not going to be book 2. I don't know if it'll be book 3, book 4, whatever, you know, we decide to do. But at some point, I think I'm going to have to go back and revisit the concept of Bourne's origin and his memory loss, because of course in the original novel it traces back to events that were going on, you know, decades earlier, and his history is connected with Vietnam, none of which would really work, you know, in the modern era. So I feel like there's going to come a time where I need to sort of, you know, revisit that core aspect of this new Jason Bourne, and that's the one I find a little intimidating, because that's so much the essence of this character. And yet I feel like if I just leave that aside and never explain what really happened to him in the modern era, that there's always going to be kind of that question mark for the reader. But that's the one that's a little scary. And I always look at it, I mean, it's not just that you're sharing ownership of this character with a giant like Ludlum, but you're sharing ownership with all of the readers and moviegoers out there too. I mean, they own that character every bit as much as the author does. And I think that, you know, we all know, I mean, as writers, that we have to respect that bond, and we have to treat, you know, our characters with respect, because they're not just our characters. As soon as we put them out there in a book, they partly belong to the readers as well. And so that's one of the things about Jason Bourne I'm always cognizant of, is that you know, I'm trying to do this to honor Ludlum, but it's even not just him, it's all of those millions of fans out there as well.
We all have the question, because I don't remember what movie it was, but you know, you have the books in Vietnam, and so you kind of put together this timeline, and it says, okay, for those who haven't read it, I'm not going to give it away, but let's just say in the movie, you see him, like, you know, the moment he's like, I'm going to join Treadstone, and then X, Y, and Z happens, and then that brings us full circle. But I felt that it was kind of, you know, just a little brush over, like, oh, this happened. And I've always wondered what, you know, because he was an academic in the books.
Yes. Yes.
And he's a superhero on the screen.
Right. Right. And much more of a loner on the screen than he really was in the books too. I mean, his relationship with Marie is at the heart of the Ludlum, not all 3 of the Ludlum novels. You know, whereas in the movies, obviously they kill off Marie in the second movie, and from that point forward, Bourne is really kind of this, you know, this cynical, isolated loner, and that's I don't. It's very exciting on the screen, but that's really not the Ludlum character.
Because I always felt that the book was a redemption story, and he found his. You know,
that's absolutely right. Yeah, yeah.
And I've tried to put a little bit of that into Treadstone. Obviously, I'm working on a different, you know, character. It's not so much the Bourne, but if you know, it's hard to write, for me at least. It's hard to write about the first thing that I was like, yeah, I'm going to write Treadstone. That's awesome. And then I was like, I'm super stoked. And then I sat down to write it, and I'm like, this guy kills people for a living. How am I going to make him likable at all?
Yeah, right, right.
You know, it's like writing Hannibal Lecter as your main character. It's like, this guy's paid to murder people.
Right, right.
So I think that one of the questions I have is, do you think that your, original, the way you write mostly before this, more of a psychological thriller?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Do you think that helped you dive deeper into Bourne and flesh out an internal and an external character that was, I think, probably, the closest representation to the original?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, that background and the psychological thrillers I do, that made it a lot easier for me to really get inside Bourne's head and bring out that aspect of the character in the books. And again, I never had the chance to kind of look inside the black box and see how, Tom and the estate went about making their call. But my assumption was that was kind of one of the reasons that they turned to me to do this, was because, they wanted someone who could bring out Bourne, the character. And that was what I think all my other books have sort of positioned me to do, is that's really where their focus is.
Because if you look at it, in my opinion, you look at the market the way it is now, and this isn't a book that many people, even if it didn't have Robert Ludlum's name on it, would be able to pull off. This is like a modernized version of, an old school Cold War thriller, like Ken Follett.
Right. Yep.
Of course, I'm going to draw a blank, but we have Ludlum. Even before Clancy, you had guys on the tip of my tongue. The Master, help me out. Forsyth, yeah,
Day of the Jackal, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Well, and that was what I grew up reading. I mean, those guys, that was what I was reading as a kid. So that still influences me today, absolutely.
And that's what I found so fresh is it's kind of basically going back, like you said, going back to Bourne, and he was waiting for you. Reading this book was like, catching up with an old friend that you haven't seen for 10 years, and you realize that nothing's changed.
Right.
You're like, we used to throw rocks at the lady. You kid her, Jason.
And that's great. I really appreciate that, because that was exactly the balancing act I wanted to pull off, was to feel like this is all new characters, standalone novel, and yet it should feel like you're sitting down with an old friend. So
it did indeed. So I don't know if you're allowed to talk about it. I don't know if you want to let this genie out of the bottle, but what can we give us a hint about what's coming next?
The second Bourne novel. I won't give too many hints, because there's a pretty significant twist in book 2. All I will say is that I have laid the foundation in book 1 for what's going to be coming in book 2. So I knew what the essential twist of book 2 was going to be when I wrote book 1. So if people are paying attention, they may have at least a glimmer of a clue of where I'm going to be going next. So, but I won't say more than that. We've John is stepping in here. We've just been having fun and chatting. Oh, is there somebody else listening to this?
Look at the live.
Yeah. So Tom Colgan mentioned in the comments one of the other authors, Alistair MacLean, who they've actually.
God, yes, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. I should have had like something up that could have like a ticker or something, but I was drawing a blank. I was like, God, I've read all these books. Why can't I remember it?
So Marcia asks in the comments, does the second book for each of you feel easier now that you've gotten one in the world under your belt?
What do you think, Josh?
No, I don't. Because for me personally, I got the first one done, and then I was immediately wishing I was like, oh man, I wish I had done this. And so I kind of set the bar a little bit higher. And so no, I would say like it's kind of like jumping in the swimming pool. You almost drown, but you get out, and then you're back on the diving board. And as you jump back in, you're like, why am I doing this?
Totally agree. Second one's harder. Yep.
Do you think some of that's just because, when you're writing the first one, like nobody's read it, nobody has any expectations of it yet. It's just kind of your own thing. And then once it's out in the world, that sort of changes it too?
Well, for me in Treadstone, it's like when I start a book, the first book, I'm meeting the character.
Yes.
And it's kind of like you write it. And I've always said, I'm not a very good plotter. So I'm not able to say he's not a chess piece. I try to give him boundaries and say, this is what I want you to do. But quite a few times halfway through the book, it's like, I'm not going to do that. And you're like, dude, I need you to do that. It's my ending. And so I feel that, once you built the character and given him this animus and he starts to go forward, he just kind of does what he wants. And there's things that evolved that I had no plan of ever putting, and they kind of are now reality. So I have to live up to that.
Yeah, and I think that when the book now becomes when the book becomes a series, so it really goes from the Bourne Evolution being essentially a standalone. I mean, it can be read independent of anything else. Now, working on the second book, now it's a series. So now Bourne as a character is evolving in my universe, not the Ludlum universe, and that I think just makes it a more challenging storytelling and creative environment. So I mean, I'm enjoying it immensely. It's a lot of fun because it's challenging, but I definitely think book 2 is harder than book 1.
So since you guys are both writing kind of in the same world, even though, like you said, Brian, yours is sort of a reboot and Josh, yours is kind of a treadstone, so it's a different thing. Do you guys have to communicate with each other at all to say like, hey, I'm going to do this in this book, just so you're kind of sort of still in the same world?
Well, I don't know how it worked with you, Josh. Tom was kind of, keeping me posted on where you were going with things, and when I turned in the manuscript, there were a couple things where he came back and said, well, maybe we could tweak this a little bit, or we could mention this character because he comes up in Josh's book. So we're going off in parallel lines here, but we want to make sure that we're not saying things in one book that just sort of compromises what we're doing on the other one. So
yes.
Yeah. So does that mean that does like Tom have like a Bourne World Bible somewhere that he can kind of refer back to?
He might from you, but I know he doesn't from me, because he's, a couple times like, what's going on here? And so I just make sure that, when I get stuck, I just blow something up or kill somebody. So I just make sure that I'm not killing anybody that he needs to use.
There we go. That's a good. I like that philosophy. I'm going to put that on a plaque.
So Sharon asks, what are y'all currently reading and loving?
Well, the only downside to breaking through as a writer for me was the fact that I can't really read my own genre anymore. When you write suspense all day long, somehow curling up with somebody else's suspense novel at the end of the day, it kind of feels like work. So I find that most of the time when I'm reading for pleasure, I'm reading nonfiction now. Biographies, history, memoirs, that kind of thing. So I'm in a very lighthearted mood now. I'm reading Midnight in Chernobyl about the Chernobyl disaster, as if 2020 hasn't been depressing enough. No, I need to add Chernobyl into that as well.
I agree 100%. That is one of the the bittersweet things is I used to devour military thrillers, and now it's like kissing your sister or whatever. It just doesn't seem
exactly right.
I pretty much only read nonfiction. I just finished I still read quite a bit, but I just finished a book on is a Jawbreaker about the first CIA team that went into Afghanistan, and started another one. I think I was reading I can't remember what it was, but I've actually read The Bourne Evolution twice, when it originally came out, and then again. So I guess I have cheated a little bit and moved back.
Well, I'm honored. I appreciate that.
So and I'm sure somebody will correct me that I'm potentially wrong here, but I feel like Eric von Lustbader was kind of one of the first people to take somebody else's kind of series character, or at least kind of in the way that we think of it now, and kind of take a series and run with it.
Approach, yeah. Huh? The legacy approach, yeah.
So I mean, I feel like he was kind of one of the earlier people to do it, and at first, we would have people kind of not really sure about that, and I think now people are a lot more willing to embrace it. With there's the Parker books, there's Clancy, they've got somebody doing Agatha Christie now. What do you think that people are so willing now to read about other people writing these characters that they love so much?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a transition in that. I think in the early days, in the very beginning, I think a lot of people didn't realize that Ludlum had passed away, and I think most people know now that you've got a lot of these co-authorship things coming up. I remember the first time I was hearing about it, I joked to my to one of the sales reps at my publisher at the time. I said, gosh, it's hard enough competing with the living authors. Now I'm competing with the dead ones too. Well, I've certainly changed my tune, haven't I? But I think publishing has discovered the concept of brands. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why James Patterson, that was his core insight that has made him so successful, was realizing that readers, like any other consumer, are attracted to powerful brands, and so he sort of branded himself. And I think the same is true now with these legacy authors, as people associate Tom Clancy and Robert B. Parker and Robert Ludlum. They associate that with great storytelling. And so if we do our job properly and deliver that kind of storytelling, then I think there are always going to be readers there for it.
I think one of the things that, in my opinion, makes Penguin and these other ones so great at the legacy series is, my editor Tom Colgan is a fan of the genre as well, and he understands the storylines. And when you speak to him, it's like you're talking to someone who's in the business, but they're also a fan. And I think they're great at realizing that, Bourne's been around since the 80s, and it's like you're watching your favorite movie or reading your favorite book. You never want it to end. And
right. That's right. Yeah.
Like we talked about earlier, going back and getting to meet Bourne again, but in a new light, done well, which Tom and his staff, everybody there, they're great about picking the perfect people for the job. Mark and just so many other ones. And I think they realize that we want, you don't want the story to end. And I think that's where the popularity.
That's great. Yeah. Readers don't want to say goodbye to these favorite characters. For me, it's really hard when I write a standalone novel, because I've spent months with these characters. I've grown so, intimately attached to these characters that when I'm writing a standalone and I get to the last page, I realize I'm never going to be with them again. And that's a very difficult emotional moment. And I think that's one of the reasons people love the idea of these series continuing, because it means they don't have to say goodbye to their favorite characters.
It's like watching, I can't remember what it was, but like the Oscars or whatever. I think that's what it was. Whenever it happened, I just kind of saw it as I was walking through, and I was like, is that Brad Pitt? Like, when did he get old? And, he's not like old, but like, the last time I saw him, and, you watch Seven or whatever, he's younger. And in these books, you have this character that transcends time, and everybody, from whatever generation can enjoy him in his prime. And I think that's something that's, just adds to the excitement of these books.
So before we wrap up tonight, do you guys want to tell everybody what you've got coming out next?
Go for it, Josh.
I'm just finishing up this last Treadstone, and we'll see what happens next.
All right.
Well, I'm going to be keeping folks busy. And in September, my next Jonathan Stride novel, Funeral for a Friend, comes out. I'm really excited about that. It's been a couple of years since we've had a Stride novel in the market. And then in October, actually, my Audible original, The Deep, Deep Snow, is finally available in print. The paperback will be coming out, I think it's October 27th. And then the next standalone thriller is called Infinite, and that should be available next March. So lots of things on the horizon.
Do you have a clone? I don't understand.
It would make things easier, that's for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. If you guys tuned in the middle of the event once we are done, you'll be able to rewatch it on Facebook in our video feed. We'll also be uploading it to YouTube in the next couple of days. We've been chatting with Brian Freeman, whose new book, The Bourne Evolution, just came out yesterday. We have signed book plates for it at the store, and we've had Joshua Hood with us talking about his book, The Treadstone Resurrection. Quick store update, we are still closed to the public, but we're offering curbside pickup, phone orders, mail mail orders, give us a call. We would love to help you over the phone like we would in the store, and wave at you through the window as we help you pick out some new books. You can give us a call at 713-524-8597, or you can visit us online at murderbooks.com. We've got both of their books. We've got other titles from them in the store. Joshua, thank you again so much tonight for being able to chat with us. This was really great to have you guys working on the same franchise and who are both big fans being able to talk about this. And Brian, congrats on the new book. I'm sorry we couldn't see you in person, but hopefully we will be able to sooner rather than later.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. Y'all take care. Thanks so much.
Thank you for
Good
having me.
night. Thanks.
Good one.